Urban Agriculture, Episode 6, The Nuts and Bolts of Indoor Farming.
This is Urban Agriculture, episode number 6, recorded on June 30th, 2014. Hey everybody, I'm Vincent Racaniello, and with me is the star of this show, Dickson Despommier.
Hello, Vincent.
Hey, Dickson.
I'm the star of the show?
Sure you are, of course.
Okay.
You are Dr. Vertical Farm.
I'll be the star of the show.
You look like a vertical farm. You have levels of...
I'm taller than you.
yeah, taller than me. How have you been, Dickson?
I've been really good, Vincent.
No, you've been well, not good.
Okay, I've been well, Vincent. I've been well and good.
Are you ever not well?
Yeah, sometimes I feel a little punkish, but not too
My
often.
non-vertical farm is doing very well.
Excellent.
I only planted it a month ago.
Our balcony vertical farm on the 8th floor of our condo is doing
What
great.
did you plant?
Well, we have decorative plants called coleus. We have about 4 different kinds of coleus.
I remember those.
And
Those
then...
with the colored leaves.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. They're nice. They're
Those
pretty.
are hippie plants.
They're cool. They're
I used to have tons of coleus.
Hippie plants.
Yeah,
I was
hippies used
never a hippie.
I used
No,
to
I was
have
never a hippie.
coleus.
Then we have about 4 different kinds of tomatoes. We have thyme, sage,
Something I don't
rosemary,
have. I don't have time.
mint, dill, oregano, marjoram,
Wow.
columbine, which you don't eat, and I'm missing one. I know I am, but I'll think of it.
So we have tomatoes.
Oh, basil.
We have tomatoes, cucumbers, squash, lettuce of various colors, eggplant,
Right,
and various peppers.
right. Now, you know what, Vincent? The very interesting thing about urban agriculture is that
Am I doing urban agriculture? I'm 38 miles from New York City.
You're doing suburban agriculture.
Okay,
You're
so
doing
I'm not going to talk
backyard
about
agriculture.
it. I'm not going to talk about it anymore.
No, but I would like to contrast it, though, because all of the plants that we just mentioned that are imminently edible and contribute to a wonderful cuisine, depending on what your cuisine preferences are, all of the things that we've mentioned can be mixed and matched together to give you Chinese food, Southeast Asian food, Italian food, French cuisine. All of those elements stem from a very few base products.
They stem.
STEM, well, it's STEM research. That's STEM. So all of those plants not only can be grown in an urban environment, they can be grown indoors. So today, I think before we start in on our interviews with people that are making their living either teaching how to grow food indoors or actually doing it, growing food indoors, and we could name a few companies that we're trying to get on the air and then get them to explain how they're doing that. Farmed Here, for instance, in Chicago, Gotham Greens in New York City, Green Spirit Farms, both in Michigan and in Pennsylvania. All of those companies are for profit, and they're making lots of food for lots of people indoors year-round under climate control conditions, which has a huge advantage over outdoor farming. So what we want to talk about today in the generic sense is what enables that? How can we do that? And I get this asked to me a lot, how can you grow plants without soil? How can you grow plants without sunlight? How can you grow plants without bees? How can you, and I keep getting, how can you? You know what I keep telling them? I said, I don't have to answer these questions anymore. All you have to do is go visit the place that's doing it.
Yeah,
They'll
people
tell
like
you.
to hear you talk, so you have to answer them.
Well,
so that's what you're going to do today, right?
I'm going to outline what are the technologies necessary in order to have continuous production of edible crops indoors.
By the way, I should mention that if you are running a vertical farm and you'd like to come on the show and talk about your solutions,
It's an open invitation.
give us an email.
And it doesn't have to be a vertical farm. It could be just an urban farm.
Yeah, that's the name of this podcast,
That's
Urban
right.
Agriculture.
So there's a ton of varieties out there.
And you could send them your proposal
Yes.
to urbanag@urbanag.ws.
That's right. And we promise eventually we'll get to all of you because I think the world needs to know what's going on. And the only way for that to happen is for us to be not the speakers of this technology, but rather let them speak.
I think there's more than one way to do urban agriculture.
You do think so, huh?
There's more than one way to do anything, Dickson.
Skinning cats. What about skinning cats? What do you think?
Cats. That's not nice. Cats are nice animals, Dickson.
Okay, so
indoor growing technologies.
Yeah, so today I thought it would be interesting and educational as well as informative if I were to share my limited knowledge. And trust me, it's limited because I don't run a vertical farm. I don't run an urban farm. I do.
You don't want to either, right?
It's not that I don't want to. I don't have time.
Why? Because you fish all the time.
No. That's not right. I do fish a little bit, though. There's no question about that. But I concentrate on learning about these examples and then bringing them to light.
Okay, I was just in your fishing environment, in Montana.
I knew I was going to ask you. How did you like your trip out west?
It's very pretty out there.
It's gorgeous, isn't it?
I don't want to fish, though.
It's seductive. I mean, it's really the Old West. I mean, you don't have to go far out of town. I know you're in Hamilton, where the National Institutes of Health has a large laboratory facility called
Rocky Mountain Laboratory.
And Rocky Mountain, why would they name it Rocky Mountain?
Well, because that's where they first began investigating Rocky Mountain spotted fever.
Ah, and what is that?
It's a tick-borne disease.
What kind of tick-borne disease?
Bacterial. Racaniello. What's the name of the Racaniello?
It's called... let's see. I used to know the name of it, but I don't. So you're going to just go to that internet, which is amazing.
Rickettsia.
I was going to say Rickettsia, but I didn't want to reveal my...
Dickson, why did you, when I said bacteria, why did you shake your head? Why isn't a Rickettsia a bacteria?
Well, because it's missing a few parts that bacteria actually have.
So they told me the history that the miners used to get this spotted rash on their bodies.
But not too many, though.
So they sent out a fellow to set up a shed, a one-person shed laboratory, and they basically would try and get isolates from these people and look at what it was. And they eventually figured out that Rocky Mountain spotted fever is a tick-borne disease caused by Rickettsia. And here in the CDC, they call it a bacterium.
Well, it's not right. But there were 4 deaths. That was the alert that got them to go out there, by the way. 4
and they had
deaths.
A shed. They had a one-shed lab with some tents outside where the scientists would sleep. And they would get specimens, and they looked in ticks, and they looked under the microscope. They would inject guinea pigs to raise antiserum.
Yep.
And then the lab stayed.
That's right.
And now it's quite large, and over
large.
400 employees, and they have a BSL-4
Which stands
laboratory.
for what? For the listeners that don't understand that language.
Right. This is not microbiology
This is not microbiology. We're in urban agriculture here.
I shouldn't even talk on this.
No, it relates, though, because it relates.
Just introduce and go away.
No, please
you
don't
could
do that.
talk.
No, I don't want you to do that.
Biosafety level 4, the highest level of containment for the most dangerous viruses.
Now, guess what?
Ebola,
if we were
Lassa, Marburg, Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever.
Rinderpest.
Well, it's an animal pathogen. They don't work. They don't work dangerous. They work on those on Plum Island. All right. We just lost all our listeners.
No, we didn't, because the concept is not different when you're trying to protect plants from their pathogens. And that's what indoor agriculture allows you to do.
How's that, Dickson? There's a door, isn't there?
You can create barriers between the outside and the inside.
Like in a biosafety lab.
Like BSL. That's exactly right. So if you go to Japan...
BSL is really expensive.
If you go to only once. You just have to pay the price. You know
no, it's not. There's a high monthly cost.
Do you know how expensive it is to replant and replant and replant and replant when you have contamination?
I don't know.
It's very expensive and very discouraging, too. And by the way, outdoors, you can't help it. You're exposed to the elements. And that's one of the disadvantages of outdoor farming. Not just the weather, but also plant pathogens and pests like insects.
So sometimes plant pathogens are spread by farmers who have stepped on plants and carry it to the next field.
They have immigration laws against
so
carrying plants from
place
place to
to make people who work in a vertical farm wear laboratory coats? They're going to have to come in with their street clothes, put them in a locker, and then put something else on to go work?
In Japan, that's exactly how they do it.
Really?
That's right.
So the one in Chicago farmed here?
Yeah.
Is that a vertical farm or an urban farm?
It's a verban farm. It's a vertical.
Verban.
Verban. Oh, I like that.
That's a new genre.
Verban. It speaks highly. It's that's also a pun.
What's that?
Speaks highly. It's a verbal. It's a vertical farm because it's more than one story
How many
tall.
stories?
Even though it's
How many
a single
stories
floor. It's about 18 feet tall.
What's one floor?
No, a single floor is only 12 feet.
Oh, so it's a big floor.
It's a very
Why is that? Because they have
warehouse.
big.
It's a former warehouse.
We'll find out. Hopefully, there will be our next guest.
That's right.
I'm working on it.
So they've been invited, and they have agreed to come on. So the Hardages will come on. I know they will. Jolanta and John are good people, and they will come on and tell us all about how they got started and what kind of crops they're growing and how they're growing them.
I'd love to hear it.
But in the meantime, why don't we
It's supposedly in 2 days.
give a preamble to that?
I'm very excited about that.
I am too, because I know that my next trip out to Chicago, I'm going to take a side trip and go up to Bedford Park and go inside Farmed here and see exactly
I'm
what's
going to
on.
Chicago in September. Why don't you come with me and I'll film you
Great
walking
idea.
through it?
You know what? That's a great idea. If I'm back from Nottingham, I'll be glad to join you.
You're not going to be back from Nottingham.
I might. What time in September are you going?
September 7th.
You're right. I will be in Nottingham giving a talk. On vertical farming, of all things. Okay, so let's talk about first the origins of indoor farming. And basically where that started was in England, back in the 1700s. The first greenhouses began as wooden structures.
Why would they do that?
Inside of which, well,
Because the winters are rough.
that's one reason.
They wanted to farm all year round.
Number two, they used them as nurseries. They made the small plants first, they germinated them, and then when they grew a certain size, they could move them outside into the soil. They also grew decorative plants that way. Exotics that wouldn't grow outside.
Like, what's
Orchids.
the ones you just have in your
Orchids.
house?
Orchids.
What did you call those plants on your porch?
Coleus.
Coleus.
No, coleus are pretty hardy plants. They're not tropical plants.
You know what my memory of Coleus is? You could go into any
Tell me.
store in New York and buy a cheap Coleus.
You could.
It's just cheap,
Yep.
generic.
And they're
They
pretty.
would die.
They're pretty.
I can't believe you're growing them.
Many of them.
I don't
Well,
really-
last year we grew flowers, and they kind of got leggy, and they didn't fill in right. So we
All right.
decided to go for Coleus this year. Maybe we'll change our mind next year, but that's another
I'm not
story.
coming to your house until you get rid of the Coleus.
Okay, fine. Well, that's a relief. At least we can keep the Coleus around now.
Are you saying I'm not going to?
No, we're just bantering here, folks. We're actually good friends. So let's talk about what you need to fulfill the basic requirements of a plant first. And I know we've covered a little bit about this before in our beginning sessions on urban agriculture. Like, for instance, how many elements?
17?
That's right. 18, actually.
Really?
Yeah, it's
Okay.
18. So 18 elements that plants need in order to grow. But, of course, we need more than that. So we need an additional 7. So
Why? If you said 18 and additional, why do you need 7 more?
Because we're not plants.
You said
more
we. I'm sorry, I
complicated
missed that.
biology than plants.
No, I didn't know
okay?
you meant humans.
No,
Yeah.
that's quite all right. That's
So
quite
you
all
could take 17 elements in water and a
18.
plant will grow in it?
right. Well, you'll need a few more things, won't you? Yeah, well, like what
What?
else? Sure. So you need sun or
Okay.
light. You
Light.
need energy. You need to put energy into a plant.
Mm-hmm.
So where that comes in the form of sunlight, usually. But it doesn't have to, as we will see. And then it needs water. Lots of water. And then that's how the plants draw their nutrients up through their roots, through the stems, into the leaves, which is where the action is.
And then it evaporates out at the top.
The water evaporates out, but the nutrients stay
And
put.
that makes a suction
It's called evapotranspiration.
from the bottom to the top,
That's
right?
right. That's right.
Is that really how it works?
That's how the clouds get there. That's how atmospheres fill up with moisture. And if you look over the Midwest, for instance, where all these horrible storms are occurring right now in Iowa and in the Midwest, as soon as the corn gets to a certain height and it starts transpiring, the entire state's almost solid corn. Imagine how much water that represents getting pumped back into the atmosphere. So that's where the water for the thunderstorms come from. They can create their own weather. Isn't that amazing?
Can you have weather in a vertical farm?
You have weather in the vertical farm, which you have to control. So you have to be able to dehumidify in order to keep the humidity low, because if you don't do that, mycological things will begin to take over. And that's not a good thing. That's a bad thing. We call that mold. So we want to keep the mold levels down, and if you do, you have to dehumidify the atmosphere. But that's a good thing, because that means you get to recollect the water that you used to grow the plants in.
So basically, you don't have windows open in a vertical
You
farm.
never
Because you don't want to lose that humidity, right?
Not just that. You don't want to let any strangers in.
Of course, the things we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
So when we go to see, when we talk to people, they will
Right.
tell us that Because I think they need to confirm this. I don't believe you.
Have it. You can go online and see this stuff. It's pretty easy to see this stuff. So if you're going to eliminate sunlight, and if you're going to eliminate...
Because multi-floors, you can't get sunlight too very readily, right?
This is very true. So what you have to do then is compensate in some way. And that's done with artificial light.
Has anyone grown crops indoors with artificial lighting?
Absolutely.
Not just in the last 5 years, but
it's been
for
going
ages.
On since there's been electricity.
These are single-level
Not necessarily. As we'll see, the configurations in which you can grow plants have now expanded into a wide variety. Very interesting technologies have come about in the
special lights?
Special lights, special growing conditions, in other words, it varies with the kind of plants that you want to grow, too. What if you have root vegetables versus vine plants versus plants that grow like lettuces?
Are you saying that the wavelength of the light is different?
No, the wavelengths are not different. The configurations in which they grow are different. So the way you apply the light to that is different.
How would you apply light to a root plant?
It's a very good question. Well, they've got a green top.
Yeah, they have a top coming out,
Sure
right?
they do, like potatoes. Potatoes are green plants on the top, roots on the bottom. Carrots, green on the top, orange on the bottom, that sort of thing. People get that idea.
So you need light.
And you need a matrix in which the root vegetable actually grows.
A matrix.
A matrix. It doesn't have to be soil, but it has to be something solid.
Can it be water?
That's not solid.
But isn't hydroponics just having the plant grow in water?
It is, but you can't grow root vegetables hydroponically very easily, although you could. Now, I'm not saying you can't do this. And in fact, the original hydroponic troughs out in UC Davis in the 1930s, where this was perfected, used floating platforms to take the seedlings of potatoes and allow them to grow floating on the nutrient system. And the potatoes on the root systems grew down into the water column, and the rest of the plant grew out from the platform. So, yeah, you can do that. You don't have to have a solid matrix, but the newer modern approaches to root vegetables are, if you took coconut shells and crushed them all up and made it into a loose fiber, or if you took volcanic rock and crushed it up. There's no nutrients whatsoever in volcanic rock. It's all obsidian. It's glass. So if you crushed it all up and made it into a soil-like material and took the seedlings that you've germinated and stuck the root systems down into that material and then supplied water and nutrients, the plant would think it's in soil because, you know what? Plants don't consume soil. They consume the water and the dissolved nutrients between the particles of soil. So when people think of plants in soil, they think, well, plants need soil. And that's why, because they eat it. But they really don't eat the soil. They eat the nutrients that are leaching out from those grains and also supplied to them by the breakdown of organic material, which is facilitated by detritivores, which are bacteria and fungi. So in soil, you've got an entire ecology helping you to mobilize nutrients from a variety of sources. Rotting leaves, that sort of thing. Or when a worm, for instance, eats bacteria, it defecates, and those are called worm casts. And the worm casts are highly nutritious for plants. So there are technologies out there called vermiculture technologies where they'll take waste from, let's say, a citrus plant, and they will... I'm sorry, Vincent is pointing to something on... It says, how to grow hydroponic root crops. Yeah, so you found a website that actually teaches you how to do that.
They use perlite.
Perlite, what is that?
It's some substance.
Innate. It's
inert.
It's inert.
But it's not dirt.
It's not dirt. No,
what
it's not.
What is perlite
dirt.
made of?
I think it's a silicone-based material, if I recall right. I might be wrong, but you could probably.
So root vegetables need some kind of.
They need a solid matrix in order to grow into, to let them feel as though they're growing into soil.
Perlite is an amorphous volcanic glass. That has a relatively high water content, typically formed by the hydration of obsidian.
Cool. Okay, so it's a little bit like volcanic rock. So I know that, for instance, half of the state of Oregon is volcanic rock. You'll never, ever in a million years run out of obsidian. And so for that reason, if hydroponics decides to become the dominant way of raising our food crops, we will be able to accommodate at least the physical aspects of all the root vegetables' needs simply by using crushed up soil particle-sized obsidian. Okay, so that's number one. So the other
what was number one?
The
That
other
was what?
particle that they use a lot is coconut fiber. From coconut.
What's number one? I'm a little confused here. You're talking about the water.
Well, we're talking about the requirements for growing plants indoors. So if you talk about water and nutrients dissolved in the water,
It's hydroponics, right?
then you have to have some way of getting that to the plants. Well, not necessarily, because you could spray it on the root systems, and that would be aeroponics. So we'll distinguish those as we go through.
So hydroponics is when you put the root right into the water.
Correct, and it's called NFT, basically, so nutrient film technology. That's the name of hydroponics the way you're used to thinking about it.
And that's what we use in a vertical farm.
It could be, but you can use other technologies there, too.
What do you mean?
I'm telling you that if you use hydroponics, the way I've just described it,
One
NFT,
form is nutrient film technology.
right. Another form is aeroponics, where you actually spray the nutrient solution onto the root systems directly. And we'll describe some systems that take advantage of that.
So the roots are hanging there,
All right.
not immersed in anything.
That's
Why don't
correct.
they dry out?
Because they're constantly being sprayed with a mist of
Mist,
nutrient-laden
a fine
water.
mist always.
Always.
And this saves water?
And we'll get to that too, but the answer is yes, of course it does. So hydroponics saves water from outdoor farming, and aeroponics saves water from indoor hydroponic farming.
So, Dickson, in hydroponics,
Yes.
do you ever have to add water?
If you don't dehydrate the atmosphere and return that water to your tank to regenerate the system like a chemostat.
Right.
Now I'm appealing to your microbiological instincts here. So people probably don't know what a chemostat is, but it's an automated feeding system for growing huge amounts of microbial life for production of fermentation products, and in this case, antibiotics. So you go to the antibiotics industry, big pharma, when they ferment something and they want a lot of it, they use a chemostat. And they use a cream separator like a centrifuge, so that they're always adding nutrients and they're always taking the organisms away so that they can stay in their log phase growth. And that's you can actually replicate that for plants and keep them growing optimally year-round at the same rate. And you can have it automated. So there are a lot of automated systems out there that will monitor the pH of the solution, because it has to be carefully monitored at a certain pH. And that varies a little bit from plant to plant, but not too much. Number two, you have to monitor the nutrients that are dissolved in the solution to make sure that they're not depleted so that the plants are not receiving their proper nutrition.
Then if you
Three,
detect,
you need oxygen levels that are high for the roots. If you don't oxygenate the roots, they'll rot.
how do you do that?
Well, you expose them to the oxygen, or you bubble oxygen into the solution before you transport it down the nutrient film technology. Those are the two ways. So aeroponics, you don't have to worry about it because they're hanging in midair.
I get plenty of oxygen. But in aeroponics, you have to make sure the nutrients in the solution you're spraying is correct.
Are a little more
are correct.
high in concentration because you're using less water. That's exactly right. And by the way, it's interesting because in nutrient film technology, the roots.
Why is it called nutrient film technology?
Well, it's a film of water that actually glides down the base of these troughs that the plants sit on.
This is hydroponics.
Yeah, that's
This is
typical
immersive hydroponics.
That's correct. The root systems are actually bathed in water.
Okay, so is anyone better than the other? Is hydroponics better than aeroponics, or vice versa?
We're going to hear from users, and we're going to hear from
Of
commercial
both?
growers. Yeah.
What do they use at farmed here in Chicago?
They use nutrient film technology.
And which one does an aeroponic?
It's called AeroFarms, and they're opening a new plant in, of all places, Newark, New Jersey. So when they finish, we can just hop on over there and film it.
Wow.
We'll be in the catbird seat, as they would say.
Are they going to build one here in Manhattan?
I don't know. We should ask them. And by the way, there's one in Scranton that's opening, Green Spirit Farms, which is using a hydroponic system, but in a rotating barrel system. And we'll get to that too. So the requirements for plant growth are
Yes.
water,
Correct.
energy source, an organic source of nitrogen, and carbon dioxide,
And 17 elements.
and 18 elements.
I'm going to say that forever.
That's okay.
18. Where do you get the elements?
Well, that varies, of course. You can make teas from rotting plants. That's one source.
Really?
Yeah.
You take rotting plants and you dip them in water?
Just let it ferment. Just let it sit over there fermenting, and then the tincture, so to speak, although that's an alcohol, so we're not going to make the word tincture here the same. You can take the supernatant from a rotting plant setting, which has yielded all of its nutrients and allowed some more to be formed by the microbes that are digesting that. And you can use the water phase of that to actually feed the plants with it.
It doesn't sound controlled.
It is controlled. There's a not controlled, or it is controlled.
Doesn't sound controlled because you know how much is in there. Do you have to check?
Well, you have to have an excess. That's the one thing you have to have. So if you don't have an excess of what you really need, the answer is you're right.
Sounds very, very cannibalistic. Plants eating plants.
It's recycling. It's just part of a
Do you have to feed a lettuce with lettuce extract?
No, of course not.
Can you feed a lettuce with carrot
Of course you can.
extract?
Of course you can. So wait, it gets even better. What if you connected
I don't believe this.
hydroponics?
I don't believe it.
You're skeptical.
I am.
Wait, Vincent, you should say, I don't believe it is an incorrect scientific inquiry.
Is there proof?
That's right.
I guess these farms that are growing vegetables are proof.
I'm sorry to tell you this.
So
but,
a person like the farm here in Chicago,
yeah.
they would make an extract of their old plants?
I don't know how they're feeding their
We'll
plants.
find out, won't we?
We certainly, unless they're not willing to tell us, of course. But I will tell you that I think what they're doing, because they were basing their operation on the plant, which is the name.
They're not going to tell us, did you just say?
Just a moment. I may not. It might be a proprietary secret.
Can they speak in broad strokes?
They could.
Okay, say like we're doing hydroponics,
Yeah,
right?
Of course.
How much water do you use per year? They probably won't tell us.
Or what do you pay your workers? Nothing.
No, I don't want to know
that.
that. Okay.
So there's a demonstration plant, a vertical farm in Chicago called The Plant.
Is that what farmed here is derived from?
We think so, because the plant in Chicago uses a closed-loop agricultural system employing aquaculture and agriculture.
What's the difference between hydroponics and aquaculture?
Fish,
You put fish in there,
tilapia.
and then do you use that water for the plants?
Yes.
Why? The fish are urinating in it, right?
And
Excreting.
exactly.
Is that good?
It's fantastic. It's not just good. It's amazing. It's amazing.
Really, coupling the two is
So
really
you
useful.
take a pellet of plant material
Yes.
to feed the tilapia because they're herbivores. They're not carnivores. They're herbivores. And you can buy these diets for tilapia. They're very cheap because they're made from leftover plants from other industries. And you feed the pellets to the tilapia. Tilapia swallow them, of course, and their microbes, their microbiome helps them digest it.
And they're in a tank.
They are in a tank.
Okay.
And the tank becomes, as you would say, toxic. Just before it becomes really toxic for the fish, it's circulated up into the hydroponic farm. And the plants extract all of those, in quotes, toxins, which in their case turns out to be nutrients, particularly ammonia, and that's an organic source of nitrogen, by the way. And urea, you said they were urinating. Urea is one of the most common fertilizers used throughout the world. It was the first synthetic organic compound ever made. And that's the reason, because it could be used
What's
as
the
a
name of that
fertilizer.
process again?
It's the Voller. It's made by Voller.
The Voller reaction?
Yeah, that's what it is. That's right.
Every time I ask you.
Well, because I remembered it from my organic chemistry
So they
days.
take the tank water from the fish,
Yeah.
and they probably have to know how many fish per
Of course,
square,
of course,
whatever,
Of course.
per liter.
That's right.
And this is flowed continuously up to the plants.
It's a chemostat.
And these are plants with the roots submerged in the solution.
NFT.
And the liquid flows over them and then goes back into the tank.
But the plant cleans the water, so
They
it comes
absorb
back
it,
clean.
yeah. So the fish do not get toxic. Everybody's happy.
And the plants get what they
And
want.
then periodically they take fish out and they sell it.
That's correct.
And they put more fish in, right?
Exactly it.
And this is really wildly successful.
Wildly successful. Yeah,
Wow.
highly.
Who proposed doing this to begin with?
That's a very good question. And perhaps we'll have John Edel on, because John Edel actually manages the plant and is very proud of his ecological relationships that he's built up. Closed loop agriculture. That's another term for this. Closed loop agriculture. Now, there's something else that's involved in some plants, but not all plants. And leafy greens are an exception to this as well.
Can you use closed loop aquaculture involving fish to grow root vegetables?
Yeah, well, that's the point. That is the closed loop The loop is closed because...
Right, can you use it to grow leafy vegetables too?
Sure.
Anything.
That's right. So there's another problem that some plants face that nature helps with that involves an animal. Can you think of that?
Another problem. Say that again.
The plant needs to solve a problem.
Yes.
And it's helped out by an animal.
And a honeybee?
That's a good guess, Dr. Racaniello. You're on the money. And what do honeybees do?
They pollinate. Right?
And what does that mean?
Well, they land on a plant and they pick up pollen from nibbling around in there.
Right.
Near the stamens and
Nibbling,
pistils.
They don't nibble.
I know. They're just...
they suck out the nectar.
They're trying to get nectar in the process.
Yeah.
Don't they collect pollen on their legs?
They do.
Because they want to bring it back to the hive,
They
right?
Because they can process it.
And what do they make out of it?
Let's think. What did you call those animals?
Honeybees.
Thank you.
And then...
But not all animals process it into honey, by the way. Bumblebees don't.
I know that the honeybees, they develop these big clumps on their legs,
pouches,
right?
They're pollen pouches.
But the bumblebees don't?
No. They have pouches, too.
What are the bumblebees looking for?
They're looking to feed on that pollen.
They actually eat it?
Yeah.
But they don't process it to honey,
You know what? Let's go to the internet just for the
you're
moment
worried.
and say, do bumblebees also make honey? Because honeybees certainly do. And even Africanized
Why would you even
do.
say they didn't if you didn't know?
Well, because I'm not a bee expert, but I do know that they're huge pollinators and they're more gentle and easier to raise than honeybees because honeybees are suffering right now from colony collapse syndrome, right?
Yeah.
And that doesn't apparently affect the bumblebee population. So
like
indoor farming,
like honeybees, bumblebees feed on nectar.
right?
We said pollen, not pollen.
No, they feed on nectar, but they collect the pollen.
They collect the pollen for other things?
No, I think they process it later and turn it into honey. That's what I think that happens to it.
Bumblebees gather pollen to feed their young.
To feed their young.
Okay,
fine. Directly. So they don't actually store it like the honeybees.
But they are important pollinators.
They're very important. Can you name some other pollinators?
No. Butterflies?
Does a
butterfly
That's right,
pollen?
of course. Butterflies, excellent. That's a great choice. Keep going.
I'm looking something up here.
No, don't you dare do this because I want you to have to guess.
I want to know if bumblebees make honey.
Did you type out the question? Do bumblebees make honey?
Yeah, I did type out the question.
I don't think they do.
You don't think so?
Otherwise, we'd be harvesting bumblebee honey.
They have nectar stores for food. And they store a tiny amount.
A tiny amount. Okay, fine. So can you name some other pollinators, though? Because on an evolutionary scale of things, flowering plants did not arise first, and then something arose. Something arose first, and then it enabled flowering plants to occur. Beetles.
They pollinate as well?
Coleoptera. Coleoptera are the largest order of insects.
An inordinate fondness for beetles.
Exactly right. And they help in pollinating like crazy. So ants, beetles, bees, wasps.
Do humans help pollinate?
Sometimes. They can. Bats. Bats?
Ticks?
No. Ticks, no. No. I don't know if monkeys are prime pollinators. I know they're seed dispersers. In the jungles, they disperse fig seeds and things like this. But
so
we're drifting a little bit away.
Bees are missing from a vertical farm.
So if you don't, we don't have to call it a vertical farm. Just call it an indoor farm because greenhouses that are closed loop and that raise plants that need pollination, like for instance blueberries.
An indoor farm.
It's an absolute requirement that a blueberry be pollinated by a bee. So how would you do that if you're an indoor farmer?
Well, I don't think you'd release bees indoors, would you?
Why not?
Where are they going to go? Are they going to make their own? You're going to have a hive for them?
Inside.
You're going to provide them with a hive?
They make their own hive.
Well, you have to have a wooden thing, no?
Well, that's the matrix, but they'll build a hive inside that easily.
If you didn't provide those boxes, what would honeybees do?
Well, they'd be up in a corner someplace building it in your house.
Is that right?
Yeah, sure.
And in a vertical farm, in an indoor farm.
That's fine.
An indoor farm, you would provide the bees with something to...
You come in with one of those. That's their house. And it's a starter set, basically. And then you just let them go at the plants.
And would they know what to do on their own?
Oh, no problems. You don't have to teach a honeybee.
Is it true every indoor farm needs to have honeybees?
Not every... No. Only if they grow plants that need pollination.
Which plants do not?
Leafy green vegetables.
Lettuce?
Yeah.
Which do?
Spinach. Corn. tomatoes,
cucumbers,
potatoes. But tomatoes are primarily air current pollinators. You don't really need a bumblebee or a honeybee.
So the air can do some of that.
Yeah, sure.
Interesting.
In fact, all of the deciduous trees of a temperate zone forest are air pollinators.
At Farmed Here, do they have bees?
Or do they grow plants that require pollination?
Yes.
That's a very good question.
So we should ask them.
We'll save that question for them.
You think we'll remember?
I'm sure we will, because
Dickson, you should write a list of questions.
The indoor farmers of the world are only farming things which have an immediate commercial value and which grow very fast and which takes very little maintenance and have few plant diseases or plant pests.
They're not going to do corn, are they?
Not tomorrow, they're not. No, they're not going to do corn.
Because right now, corn is high maintenance.
They won't go for wheat either. They won't go for rice. Well, although in Japan they did go for rice indoors, and we'll talk about
why
indoor
won't
farm
they?
that did. Well, because I think outdoor farming still trumps indoor farming in terms of volume. Okay, so, and the idea hasn't caught on yet so well. So these high cash crops, though, these are sure things. You can almost sell your crops before you plant them because you're assured about a 90% success
But you're
rate.
Convinced that in 50 years we will have to move some of these to vertical
I believe
indoor
that's
farms.
true. We're going to have to start restoring part of this environment if we're going to survive.
Right.
And in order to restore it, we have to give land back to nature.
So the kinds of crops that are currently grown indoors, a lot of herbs, right? Lettuces,
tomatoes, green beans, zucchinis, melons, lots of melons, peppers, a lot of peppers.
But none of the grains then, right?
I didn't say that. No, I didn't say that.
You said wheat.
Well, if you go to Japan, there's a building in Tokyo called Pasona O2.
Pasona O2?
Pasona, another word, O2 for oxygen.
As in oxygen?
Yeah.
What is that?
Well, you'll see. It's a human resource building, basically. It's an office building. It's 9 stories tall, and in every floor they're growing some edible plants, including in the foyer, rice.
I don't know if that's good because you have people who have their clothes on, work clothes, next to them, right?
You're absolutely right. There's a chance for contamination. There is a chance. And they're not growing it for commercial value. They're growing it to demonstrate that you can do it. And you can integrate an office and indoor growing at the same time.
But what about the bees?
They don't grow plants that require pollination.
Yeah,
so
I would think not, because then the workers are going to get, not the worker bees, but the human workers.
You know, bumblebees are very tame and they're not aggressive. And so you can work comfortably in the presence of bumblebees without a problem. Honeybees, if you annoy them, sometimes they'll
so you
sting
can put bumblebees in your indoor farm?
Well, they're used quite frequently indoors, frequently. The peppers, for instance, require bees. Okay, all the peppers, green, red, yellow, orange, those big bell peppers, yellow, little hot peppers, those little jalapenos, all of those little peppers require
So far we've got water and some nutrients you put in the water.
Water, nutrients, organic nitrogen.
Which you add to the water.
Carbon.
Where do you get the carbon from?
Well, you're breathing it out every time you speak.
It comes from the carbon monoxide.
That's right.
Sorry, carbon dioxide in the air.
So here's an aside, but just stop right there.
So you don't have to add carbon?
Of course not. So here was an interesting question that they addressed to the University of California, Berkeley undergraduate biology students in their, I believe it was the third year, I'm not sure, but it was not first year students or second year students. It might have even been seniors. And they did a questionnaire on the street, sort of a man on the street with a microphone. Pardon me, are you a biology student? Yes, I am. And you go to school here at the University of California at Berkeley? Yes, I do. And I've seen this interview, I think it was on one of the science shows, to show you how people who are not attached to process actually don't have a very good idea of what goes on. And so they asked the students where they thought the carbon from the plants came from. Because plants are, we're leaning against part of a plant right now, right? It's the table.
Wood, yeah.
This used to be a plant. And it's cellulose. And cellulose is really a very inert form of carbon that very few things can eat, but termites are an exception in this case. Okay, so they're asking these students, where does all that carbon come from? And to a person, nobody got it right. Nobody got the question right. To a person, they said, well, it comes from the soil. And explain that. Thank you, because the interviewer said, "Are you sure?" And I said, "Of course. Plants get everything they need from the soil." And they said, "Are you really sure?" You remember my cousin Vinny? You remember when she's up on the stage, up on the stands, and he says, "Are you sure?" She says, "I'm sure." "Are you sure?" "I'm very sure." It was a funny movie, but it was. Are you really sure that plants get all their carbon from the soil? Yes, they get their nutrients from the soil, they get their water from the soil, and they get carbon from the soil. And then they said, well, what if we told you that plants actually get their carbon from the atmosphere? And they looked at the interviewer like he was crazy. How could it come from the air?
Have plants in the room at night, right?
How could it come
They
from
use
the
the
air?
carbon dioxide, right?
At night, plants will switch.
Actually, they switch to oxygen, right?
They do.
Because there's no light.
That's correct. At night, plants actually secrete CO2.
Yeah.
During the daytime, however, they absorb CO2 and they secrete oxygen.
So you shouldn't have too many plants in your bedroom.
No, that's not how it works.
Not going to hurt.
That's not how it works. It's not a one-to-one situation. Plants can go dormant during the nighttime too, by the way. So the point is that here we are worried about global climate change, and part of the global climate change issue involves carbon dioxide, the stuff that we're putting in the atmosphere. And so how do we get it out of the atmosphere? How could you possibly get it out of the atmosphere? Well, the answer is simple. Just put the trees back where they used to be, and they'll suck it out for you. They'll sequester it. It's
and make
called
oxygen.
Carbon sequestration. Carbon sequestration.
And if you plant legumes, you don't even need to add nitrogen.
You don't even have to.
Does anyone plant legumes in an indoor form?
Sure, absolutely.
Like the
Green
soybean.
Green beans are legumes. They are.
And that they don't have to.
They've already got the nodules. They've got the bacteria in the
They don't
nodules.
have to add nitrogen to the water.
They're born with it.
Okay,
Right.
so now we have a source of carbon, which is CO2.
Right.
We have our honeybees or bumblebees.
And by the way, increasing the atmosphere by 5%, just over what it is. You take a reading of what it is, and it's about 300 parts per million. You increase it by 5%, the plants grow better. You increase it by 10%, and they grow worse.
CO2?
Yeah.
How do you do that in an indoor environment?
See that tank over there with that valve?
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's all closed
Wait
environment,
a minute.
right?
How do you do it for your cells? Vincent,
but
you're a cell biologist.
Yeah, I understand, but it's in a
So
small
that's how
tank.
you do it.
This is a huge volume,
So?
and there are people walking through it.
You mean to tell me that we can't afford that much CO2? All you have to do is let a piece of dry ice start
and
to
the
dehydrate.
people are okay in these indoor farms?
Absolutely.
And then 5% extra CO2.
Not
What
bad.
is the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere?
I just told you, 300 parts per million.
Percent. Oxygen is
Well-
21, right?
Yeah. This is low.
It's lower.
It's a
and
low
nitrogen is
percentage.
how much?
76.
Huge.
It's the dominant form.
Nitrogen
it's
is great.
Inorganic.
I
It's inert.
bow to nitrogen.
Thank you. And then you got trace elements like argon and
In the air,
CO2. Yeah, and methane, and that's another greenhouse gas, by the way, that animals
Right.
put there, right? So plants indoors need one thing that you can't supply in any other way except using the electromagnetic spectrum.
Yeah, they need illumination.
They need
light.
illumination. So where does that come
Well,
from?
if it's an outdoor farm, it's from the sun, Dickson.
Not a problemo, right?
And that's why farmers like sunlight.
Hey, they love sunlight.
If they have 20 days
Not
of clouds, they're
Too
upset.
much sunlight. Well, let's go to the drought monitor right now. Just check out what does the drought monitor today say what's going on in California. We still got that drought in California?
I'm pretty sure.
Me too.
Ugh, Dickson, the
Yeah,
state's
I know,
all
it's
red.
probably worse.
Look at that.
Oh my gosh.
State's
oh my
all
god.
pretty red.
California's doomed. And I don't say that in a jocular way either. I'm just
So I
feel
in
so bad.
Montana, and
You know what?
there's
It's-
no drawing over Montana. They don't
There's
monitor
a
it.
change in the jet stream. And the jet stream has caused all this to happen.
So some of these states don't have any colors. That's because they're not monitored.
No, they're all monitored. That
But like
means there's no
Montana,
drought.
which is where I
There's no
was,
drought.
there was no drought.
There's no drought. But look at where it is. The drought is where the Dust Bowl was in the
Yeah.
1930s,
Right there in the middle.
and it's in California, where the people moved to after that Dust Bowl occurred. So,
It's ridiculous. The
I
places
know.
where they farm is drought.
so here's the deal. If you were living in California,
I'd
What would
come
you
to
rather
New
do?
Jersey.
what would you rather do? Farm indoors or outdoors?
Indoors.
Right. And why would you want to do it indoors, Vincent?
Well, Dickson, I'll tell you, you'd have to get water, and that may not be easy.
But the water you need is much less.
I understand.
70% less.
Can you give me a feel for how much water you'd need?
You mean total? Just
Indoor. Give me some measure.
Well, I'm going to do that.
Not with your hands.
Well, I can only do it with my hands because, well, I'm not Italian. That's right. I shouldn't. So outdoor farming of the same equivalent amount of farming indoors requires 70% more water than it does indoors because of this targeting of the water to the root systems.
It's not very efficient, right?
It's not efficient outside. So you get agricultural runoff, which is another big problem. I mean, we've discussed this in prior episodes. So indoor farming has lots of advantages. The biggest one now, by the way, if you could recover the gray water and make it palatable, the plants could use that right now as an indoor source of water. And that could eliminate this big issue that they've got going on now if they were to farm indoors. Ironically, UC Davis championed this idea.
I have a friend who, an associate who worked with me in Montana. He's from California. And he said, one morning, he said, I took a half-hour shower because in California we're supposed to be like 5 minutes.
That's right. You can't water your lawns. You can't rush your cars. There's a lot of things you can't do out there right now because it's a huge drought alert. And it's not going to go away.
How long has this been going on?
It's 3 years. And it could last a long time.
Prices of food are rising, right?
Of course.
So are there any indoor farms in California?
Many. There are many
Not
indoor
enough?
farms. Not enough. That's right, not enough. Sure. So, okay.
Well, we got water. We got any more nutrients that we have to go through?
No, we're fine. We've covered pollination.
And then we need light.
Light. Now,
Where do we get light from?
Well, you have a lot of choices here, right? You can start with incandescent light bulbs.
Incandescent.
If you'd like.
Is that the one that Thomas Edison invented?
The very one.
And which you can't use anymore, right?
Well, you shouldn't.
You know the ones that are with the curly Q?
What is that curly Q?
Is that a fluorescent? Compact fluorescent bulb.
Oh, no, the curly Q. I thought you meant the filament inside.
So an incandescent has a filament inside.
Let's talk about the incandescent first.
Okay.
Inefficiencies. So Thomas Edison determined that if you took a filament of, in this case, it was titanium or it was some other hard metal that didn't melt, and connected the electrode of the positive and the negative electrode, the anode and the cathode, and made it go through the wire, there's enough resistance in the wire to generate not only heat, but light.
Right.
And the light revolutionized, you know what it did? It saved the whales. Because without them, without the incandescent light bulb, the whale oil would still be used to light up the night. And there eventually wouldn't be any more whales left. And then there wouldn't be any more light left.
Can't use petroleum to do that?
It's not a renewable resource. They didn't have petroleum then.
Right.
So,
but nowadays you could use petroleum.
Of course they do. And then you could, well, by the way, we do use petroleum to generate the electricity that goes through the incandescent light bulb. So for many years, we were using an alternating current, and we were using incandescent light bulbs, which are incredibly inefficient.
What's the efficiency rating?
5%.
So 5% of the electricity is converted to light.
And the rest?
This is often heat, right?
Yeah, well, not often, always. You have to account for it.
Yeah, that's bad. 5%.
That's horrible.
But Thomas Edison was happy to get a bulb.
And we have to make a vacuum in there, too. Otherwise, the filament will burn up.
Yep.
Okay, so you have to take a piece of glass, create a vacuum in it, and still keep the electronics straight. Okay, so that was a very clever technology to begin with, but it wasn't good enough. In the beginning, we didn't care how much electricity it used. We really didn't care because there weren't that many of us. But today, there are lots of us, right? And the whole world at night. If you go to the NASA website, type out the Earth at night, you can see where everybody lives except in North Korea.
There's no light?
Not at night.
Why?
Because they have a very, very faltering economy, and they can't afford it. It's true. Some of the cultures do have the same problem, and so you won't see them at night either. But most of them you will see. You will see the entire country of Japan. You will see the entire country of Italy. You'll see the entire country of, and you can find the borders of countries by looking where the light stops and where it starts up again. So incandescent light bulbs.
So it's going to be very expensive to use an incandescent bulb to farm indoors because it's
Yeah,
only
because
5%.
the sun is free.
Are fluorescent lights any better?
Well, let's go to the next level then.
Okay.
Yeah, let's go to the next level. So let's go to fluorescent lights.
And they were developed many
But
years
I
after.
also want to say this, that the incandescent light bulb, when the light is given off, is not exactly the wavelength you need. Not exactly.
For growing plants?
That's right, because there are specific wavelengths that plants need for chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B. And the incandescent light bulb doesn't give off enough of a certain
So
wavelength.
farms do not use...
So it's inefficient. They started out using it because they had no choice.
I see.
So then
And
fluorescent
that's
light
why
bulbs,
when I was trying to grow plants, I had to buy a plant light, a special
grow
plant light. I paid $15 for it.
and it was a different color.
A grow
Remember
light.
what color it was?
Purplish.
Purplish, red and blue. It was red and blue. We'll get to that. That's a jump ahead.
All right, so
So the
fluorescent.
next kind of light, which has a higher efficiency for giving off light to the amount of electricity it uses, is fluorescent light.
What's the efficiency?
About 10 to 15%.
Okay. And the light
Still not as great.
light is different.
Wavelengths are okay.
But they don't give off as much heat, right?
They don't give up as much heat. That's true.
And so the wavelength is still not correct for plants?
It's not perfect.
Okay.
Not perfect. But many indoor growers use fluorescent lights because they're cheap. Even though the plants don't grow optimally, they still do grow. And so if you consider cost of investment versus return on investment, it's profitable to use fluorescent lights in some situations. So you'll find some indoor farming is using fluorescent lights.
And the nice thing is that they're long.
They're long. You can expose large amounts of plant life to them, especially the ones growing in the nutrient film technology troughs, okay, as rows of plants. So that's an acceptable but not perfect solution.
Okay. Got it.
Then, 50 years ago, the light-emitting diode was invented.
Light-emitting diode, LED.
Yes, that's exactly right. And light-emitting diodes revolutionized the way we looked at generating light. And the efficiency started at 20%. It began at 20%. So that was already 10 times higher than fluorescence, which was 10 times higher, twice as high as incandescence. Today, the LED lights that are available in the hardware stores or at Home Depot and places like this, they're about 28% efficient. You can put your hands on them and they won't generate heat.
These are bulbs. They have a form factor like a light bulb, but inside is an LED.
Correct.
They're very expensive, right?
Well, they are because they're harder to make and they take up exotic materials to make them. These are not tungsten filaments and simple vacuum tubes. These are complicated devices.
They're semiconductors, basically.
They are semiconductors.
Now, these were invented in 1927 and 1961.
1961 was the year I wanted to talk about.
The compact fluorescent came after the LED? Okay.
Yep. So then when LED lighting was invented, they realized that by varying the amounts of things, they could control the wavelength. Wow. So you could make a red LED or a blue LED or a green LED or an orange LED.
So you could get just the right wavelength for plants?
Right. Well, what is just the right wavelength? That's the point.
I don't know.
Well, it's easy to find out, actually. If you were to type out absorption spectra for chlorophyll A and B, absorption spectra for chlorophyll A and B, and Google Images and hit that button, you will be absolutely stunned at the number of graphs, all the same, showing the absorption spectra of chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B. And it turns out that the absorption spectra for both A and B have double peak absorptions.
Yes, I see.
And mostly one is red and mostly the other is blue. So if you had red and blue light emitting diodes as your light source and eliminated all the other wavelengths of light, that's right, and eliminated all the other wavelengths of light from visible light spectra, your plants would be just as happy as if they were grown outside. That means, that's revolutionary to realize that plants don't actually need the entire spectrum of visible light.
When was that figured out?
Back in the 1920s. Whenever we could separate light and play with the wavelengths and expose plants to certain wavelengths. Now, Argonne National Labs, by the way, I don't know if you're familiar with this or not, because I know you went to Cornell, but everybody who went to the University of Chicago is very familiar with Argonne National Labs, which isn't far away. They have the world's largest spectrograph.
Mm-hmm.
I will tell you that you could get a pure color that's 3 feet wide. That's quite amazing. In one of the, when the rainbow colors are spread out,
Right.
each color is about 2 to 3 feet wide.
It's a big prism.
You can expose anything to a very small subset of yellow, red, blue, green, orange, and that's how they can find out the exact spectral requirements for things.
So when they produce bulbs for indoor plant growing, they just need those 2 spectra.
That's exactly right. So
can you just get those 2, or do you have to have the ones in between?
No. The proof of it comes by combining blue and red, and it makes a kind of a purplish reddish color when
that's
they're put
grow
together.
light, huh? Plant light.
It is, and it's not 1-to-1, by the way. It's like 3-to-1, 3 reds to 1 blue, and it creates these patterns of light.
Do people need light?
I believe we do.
If we were in the dark all the time, what would happen?
We'd lose our color. I don't know what would happen. We'd certainly lose our skin color because we get some of that from the sun. And vitamin D, we would lose our ability to produce vitamin D. And vitamin D is an essential ingredient because the definition of a vitamin is something.
Definition.
I meant to say that. I'm speaking faster than I'm thinking. The definition of a vitamin is something that you can't synthesize and you need to ingest from the outside. So,
what spectrum do we need? This is getting out of indoor farming, I know. Just
well,
curious.
We're outdoor farmers. We're outdoor people. I don't know what spectrum activates the synthesis of vitamin D in the skin, but it's got to be in the visible spectrum because UVB radiation is very bad for you because it interferes with your DNA synthesis by making thymine dimers, as we well know. So there are some wavelengths that are not good and some wavelengths that are absolutely spectacular. So if you're running an indoor farm, though, look at the advantages, Vincent. And what if you only needed 20% of the visible spectrum?
Maybe you could get more efficient, right?
Not maybe.
For sure?
For sure. You
So
could
tell
eliminate 80% of the visible spectrum of light and still grow your plants at
What
exactly
kind of
the
lamp
same
is
way.
this? Going to be fluorescent or LED?
It's LED.
So they make LEDs specifically for growing plants.
They do.
And
So if you typed that out,
what do I type out?
type out LED grow light on Google Images, and you'll get an array of growing systems.
They're all,
employing-
Dickson, they're
Do you
all
see?
purple.
Well, that's what you get when you combine red and blue.
They've just confirmed what you have just
That's right.
told
So
us.
as people
Wow.
are listening to us
Look.
speak, they can do the same thing on their
Look.
computer as they are listening along, and they can
Yeah.
get the same images that you've got. And you get,
So, Dixon, if we go to an indoor farm, it's going to be purple?
well, some of them will be.
Oh, what about the rest?
Well, I think the ones that are growing at maximum efficiency are using LED grow lights at the right wavelengths.
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, I went to a vertical farm in Texas, and I think I told you this. It was 18 stories tall. It was all automated. They weren't growing food. They were growing plants that they were genetically engineering to make products for human medicine.
Well, they make some huge arrays, panels of these
Enormous.
lights.
They're big trays of plants that they grow.
And what's the efficiency of these LED grow lights?
That's a very good question. So currently, the maximum efficiency of an LED grow light is 28%. So when you compare that to a
Not good enough.
fluorescent, that's right, it's not good enough. It's not good enough.
Oh, so sorry.
Well, don't be sorry, because I've got some good news for you.
What's that?
The Philips company in Holland has invented last year a 68% efficient LED grow light. They announced it to the world. So if you typed out Philips high efficiency LED, you'll get a picture of the guy holding the light, and he'll show it to you, and it's 68% efficient. They measure light in terms of lumens.
They won a $10 million prize for inventing this.
Yes, they did.
Huh. Wow.
You look
But
surprised.
they're not cheap.
Oh, they'll never be cheap to begin with.
Philips creates the world's most energy efficient light.
That's right. They'll never be cheap to begin with. But once they start to be used in quantity, they will be very
How
cheap.
long do they last?
That's another great question. It depends on the manufacturer, and it depends on the configuration. But many of these LED light bulbs that you buy at the hardware store, they'll last 15 years. And that's why they're so expensive, because over time they will pay for themselves, and they'll be about as cheap as an incandescent light bulb, because you replace the incandescents again and again.
So the LED is what our colleague has put into his home, right?
That's right. Yeah, that's a different kind of light.
Well, yeah, the ones for your home they're
not of the right spectrum.
Not the right, but they are the same principle. There's an LED.
Exactly the same principle.
Now, the compact fluorescent was kind of an in-between measure between incandescent, fluorescent, and LED, right?
Sure.
And those are getting sort of left. Or people they're ugly and they're cold.
Well,
they take a while to get going, right?
Well, all of those problems have been addressed, and the issues have been solved. But if you're willing to pay for them, okay. You know what the biggest user of LED lights are right now?
Who?
City municipalities.
They put them in the light posts.
They're putting them in the lamp post, and they're putting them in the stoplights.
Mm-hmm.
They're perfect for that situation. And the country of Australia got rid of incandescent light bulbs and converted to fluorescent light bulbs. That's just to fluorescents. They saved $1 billion in one day. If they now make the same switch with LED lights for fluorescent lights, they'll save another $2 billion in energy costs. So that's quite remarkable. Yeah, look at that. Isn't that amazing?
This is purple marijuana.
I know that. I know what marijuana is.
No, you don't.
Yes, I do. Even though I have never participated in smoking it, that doesn't mean I don't know
you
what
just
it is.
didn't inhale, right?
I didn't even... I've been around people.
Listen, Dickson, so when indoor farming when you got the idea of a vertical farm, where was lighting technology?
Well, that was 10 years ago. So the LED light bulb was being used as a grow light very, very sparingly. Mm-hmm. The most common source was fluorescence. The incandescent light bulb had fallen out of disuse at that point.
So the farms now that are being built have LED grow
they're
lights.
They're all demanding high-tech, high-efficient LED
So they even want more than 68%,
Philips,
right?
No. 68% is more than enough efficiency to make it economical for anyone to develop a business plan, go to a bank, get a loan out, develop your own indoor farm, and sell for a profit.
So do you think that this high-efficiency LED grow light really was the game changer?
No.
What was the game changer? Dickson? Despommier?
No, of course not. Of course not. Of course not. The game changer was to realize that climate change is on its way.
Yeah, but you need a technology jump to be able to do things.
If you're a country that needs to eat, it doesn't matter how much it costs. Do you know how much we subsidize farming? Do you know how much fossil fuel use farming consumes? 20% of the annual budget in the United States. You know how many dollars that is? It's $700 billion worth of oil just to farm. What if you took $2 billion of those dollars and developed a research program to make indoor farming much more efficient, which you could do, of course, because all you need to do is throw money at a problem and eventually you'll solve that problem. We've proven that time and time again. So that's what we need to be doing. And in fact, there are countries actually doing that right now. Japan is doing it. Germany is doing it. France is doing it. And in September, I'll be going to England, and Nottingham University is thinking of doing it as well, to build an experimental vertical farm, so to allow their ag students to work on indoor farming as well as outdoor farming. So that's really what the missing link is right now in this chain of events that needs to happen, I think.
Now, these are these essentials, right?
Yes.
Water, the nutrients, CO2 from the air, light.
And an organic source of nitrogen.
Organic source of nitrogen. And there are many ways to put these together.
Yeah, there's another thing we should talk about.
What's that?
Here. That is the availability of P. That stands for phosphorus.
Phosphorus.
So phosphorus comes from where, do you think? Outdoor fertilizers contain three different things.
Florida.
N,
Isn't
P,
there phosphorus
and K.
mines in Florida?
N, P, and K.
So,
right?
so
the N is
nitrogen.
It's organic nitrogen. What is the nitrogen? What form do you think it comes in?
Well, it's a gas, and the plants fix it.
No. In the bag of fertilizer, what form do
ammonia?
You think it is? It could be ammonia.
Urea?
But it could be urea. Could be urea or ammonium nitrate.
Ammonium nitrate.
That gets you two things at once, and that's the Haber-Bosch process.
Nitrogen and
the Haber-Bosch process.
Nitrogen and...
We can fix chemically.
What do you get?
Nitrogen from the air, and you can make ammonium nitrate.
What are the two things you get with that?
Well, you get organic nitrogen
Yes.
and you get organic nitrogen.
What did you mean two things?
Two different sources. So that's for nitrogen. So N is
NH4NO, or whatever,
NO2,
okay? You're getting nitrogen
or urea
and oxygen.
Now the
But
second
you don't need
thing
oxygen from
that's in
that.
the atmosphere. The second thing you need is phosphorus.
Phosphorus comes
what?
from a mine in Florida.
What do you need phosphorus for, Vincent?
Nucleic acids.
There you go.
You know what you need
go.
nitrogen for?
Nucleic acids.
And proteins.
That's right.
Right.
So the phosphorus
And K.
only comes from a limited source.
Right. There's a mine in Florida. This is the third time I've said this
I
now.
know that. And you've said it
And
4
you've
times
ignored
now.
me.
No, I have not. I've understood you perfectly. Do you know where the other mines are? Let's find out.
Hawaii.
Global phosphorus mining. No, there's one near Jordan. There's one in Utah. There's one in, I believe, Russia. Why are there only a few?
I don't know.
Where did the phosphorus come from?
Bat guano.
Why is it no? But that is a potential source, by the way. That didn't come from bat guano, though. It came from a long time ago, when there were just algae growing in the oceans.
50 to 100 years, it's supposed to be gone.
That's the deal.
It doesn't say where it is. It's probably all over the place,
50
right?
to 100 years worth of phosphorus, and then it's all gone. What's going to happen?
What made the
Vincent?
phosphorus to begin with, Dickson?
Oh, well, I'm telling you right now, huge algal deposits.
Uh-huh.
As the algae grew and died, they just kept depositing themselves in one place. So if there's a limited supply of phosphorus, what are we going to do in 100 years from now?
So
If
it
we
runs
continue
off.
to use it,
It runs off.
it does. And then where does it
So in
go?
your vertical farm, you can
Hang on, I didn't finish
be
the
more
thought.
efficient, but the plants are going to use the phosphorus, so it's not like you can recycle it, right?
Vincent,
I'm listening.
outdoors, how do you apply fertilizer?
You spray it on the soil or
Is
put
that
it
an
on
efficient way of
power.
getting it
No,
to
it's
the
just
root?
like it's like watering plants outside. It's
Right.
not good. So
That's
then it
right.
runs off and it goes
Correct.
in the oceans and
You
causes
got
algal blooms.
Yeah, but forget about running in the ocean for a ride.
can't
now.
we recover it? No,
What
too
percentage?
expensive.
No, because it gets taken up by the algae, and then it gets dispersed.
Give it back. Give it back.
No, we wish we could. So the efficiency is horrible of getting the phosphorus to the plants, whereas indoor farming says if you don't take it up for the first passage, you can take it up for the second or the third.
So you
or
have
the
to supplement your water, but probably very little,
exactly.
and you don't lose any of it to the
So
environment.
if we could
Yeah.
grow everything indoors that we now grow outdoors, do you know how much phosphorus we'd have left in the soil?
How much?
1,000 years worth.
So if we converted all dirt farming to indoor
We're not
farming,
going to do that. But
no, we're not.
But what's going to happen to dirt farming in another 100 years?
Why
do you think,
can't we
if they're
cultivate
right?
microbes to make phosphorus for us?
You can't make an element unless you're the sun.
Yeah, you can't. I don't mean make it, but I mean
Concentrate it.
where is it in the earth? Where is
Tell you
it?
Where it is? It's dispersed. It's totally dispersed. It's
I
totally
see. So
inefficient.
the issue here is that there's a ton of nitrogen in the air, more than we could ever use,
we can
right?
suck it out of the air at least, right? You don't have to worry
Yeah.
about mining it.
Yeah, the phosphorus is in the
And
ground.
there's
Where is
76% of it
the
in the air.
nitrogen's in the air too? No, I don't mean
Potassium.
nitrogen.
You
The
need potassium.
carbon is in the air as well. So the phosphorus is the one that's in the soil, and that's essential.
So is potassium, but potassium is an easy one to get. That's a simple one. There's tons of
So
potassium.
what you're saying is the processes that led to the production of phosphorus are finished?
I'm saying that phosphorus mining
Yeah.
is finite. It's a limited, non-renewable resource, just like oil is.
All right, so what I'm saying to you is
Yes.
this: you're saying this phosphorus was deposited by microbes. What did they do to deposit it?
They died.
So aren't more dying now and
Yeah,
depositing
but not
it
like
somewhere?
they did in the old days when there were only algae and nothing else.
Got it. Okay.
You know the cyanobacteria, right? They were around for 2.5 billion years.
So Dickson, basically what you're saying is there is a finite supply of each element here on Earth, and once we've used it up, that's it.
We don't. No, it doesn't go away. It just is unavailable at that point
You
because
cannot
it
make a
becomes
new one
dispersed.
and- yeah.
It becomes dispersed.
Yeah, you don't destroy it, right?
It just becomes dispersed.
Just like you can't make it.
That's right.
Wow.
So indoor farming solves a lot of problems.
Yeah.
It does.
Why didn't you tell me this before?
Why didn't you ask? No, you did so.
I
You knew
did.
this.
You
You're
did
just
tell
baiting
me.
me.
I am baiting
I
you.
know this. That's okay. I'm a fish. I'll go. So what I really want to say is that now that if you put all these elements together and make a checklist of here's what I need to farm indoors, all right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, every farm, indoor farm, does it differently. It's a different configuration. It's like going into, it's exactly like that. It's like going into 20 different laboratories working on viruses that you are familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
And I can guarantee you, and you'll verify this, no one does it the same way.
That's right.
They've all got their incubators in a certain place, and their pipettes in a certain place, and their technicians in a certain place, and their postdocs in a certain place, and their growing chambers in a certain place, and their centrifuges. Everybody does it different. And they all use different centrifuges and different pipettes and everything else, but they get the same result. And that's what's going on in indoor farming right now. The configurations vary greatly. And if you're clever, and if you've got an engineering group working with you and you want to grow tomatoes the most efficient way ever, you can devise a vine system for them to grow on, which nobody else can duplicate because you used engineering and knowledge of the plant's growth to design specifically for tomatoes. Or if you want to grow green beans, or if you want to grow squash or cabbage or whatever, you have to think about the physicality of that plant in order to get it to grow most efficiently. And indoor farming, outdoor farming, it's not different. Maximum yield. That's what they're all after. Maximum yield.
I presume also that there's a way to harvest all of this.
Absolutely.
To be very efficient, right?
Well, yeah. You can automate it.
Right. What are these things you showed me where the racks of plants are circulating?
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Why are they doing that?
Well, that's the Omega Grow System. So if you were to type Omega Grow Systems out, of course, on Google, and you go look, there's a video that you can actually download by a high school biology teacher that shows the advantages of placing plants in a matrix, much the same kind of a matrix that you'd use for your air conditioning filters. It's made out of Dacron. It's a solid matrix. It's a matrix that the root systems can grow into. And this thing rotates the roots through a nutrient bath. Every hour, this thing rotates.
This is like, this is basically aeroponics, right?
No, it's not aeroponics. No, it's hydroponics. It's a very unusual form of hydroponics.
But the roots are going in and out?
That's true. They are. So they grow twice as fast, though.
Why is that?
Because they're disoriented in terms of the pull of gravity. So they get scared and they start to reproduce because that's what everything wants to do when they're scared. They want to make more of themselves before they die.
Not me.
Well, the birth rate just before war goes way up, by the way.
Really?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. So I think all animals and plants, once they panic and once they realize that they're about to die, I don't mean today, I mean eventually, their urge to leave something behind takes over. And in this case, plants are prime examples for this. So this Omega Grow System, although they didn't start out designing it that way, they found out along the way as an unintended consequence that growing plants in a rotating system doubles the amount of plants that you get and shortens the length of time that they mature to a harvestable level. What a remarkable finding. That's fantastic.
It depends how cost effective it is, right, Dickson?
That's right. They used a fluorescent light in the beginning of their experiments. They switched to the grow light. They increased the growth rate by another ×2. So that's ×4 now over conventional growing indoors. That's remarkable. So there's a wonderful video called Farm Dominium. A Farm Dominium. It's a animated cartoon showing what an industrial size Omega Grow Systems farm might look like. So guess who uses those systems right off the shelf? Green Spirit Farms. And Green Spirit Farms is in Scranton, and they now have what they claim is, and I'm sure they're right, the world's largest indoor vertical farm.
Largest in what, height?
more area. They're 300,000 square
Do
feet.
you know how many stories it is?
I think that's a single story, but I think that it's very high. They used to manufacture fiber optics at this plant. And
Cool.
It was a Corning factory that now is devoted to that.
We should go check them out, Dickson.
Now there's another bifurcation in this schema, as they would say. All right, one side, manual labor; other side, automation.
Right.
If you go to Japan, they are enamored with automation.
Mm-hmm.
And so Japan has a lot of what they call plant factories. And because they have to, they've had this unusual event, this Fukushima event, which has forced them to rethink where their food comes from and what food safety is all about.
Mm-hmm.
So they have a burgeoning indoor farming industry going on in Japan right now, in all variations. And the Japanese are industrious, they're literate, they're middle class, so they've got the money to afford the price of these products, and they refuse to take no for an answer. So here's how to generate a lot of food in a very small space. And that's what they've all been dying to do anyway. Would you like to guess, of all the land that Japan occupies, how much of it is farmable? What percentage do you think is farmable?
20%.
That's right.
It's
And
not a
why do
lot,
you
huh?
think that is?
I think people are living on the rest.
No. The rest are mountains.
Mountains, too.
Mountains and forest.
Yeah.
The land that people live on, by the way, is very small. Did you know that if you added up all of the land that human beings live on, do you know how much land that would equal in terms of the Earth's
on the
amount?
entire Earth?
It's only about 5% of the total.
Why is
area.
that, Dickson?
Well, because look at us. Look out the window, Vincent.
We like to live near each other?
Not just near each other. We like to live on top of each other. Look at the building across the river that I'm looking at right now in Fort Lee, New Jersey.
Yeah, but I hear in Australia that they're all spread out.
They are spread out, but
10 million people. Huge
they
continent.
have 22 million people, actually, I think.
Sorry, but is it 22?
I think it's that.
Let's look it up.
Yeah, why guess? You can actually get an official census from the
Because
country of Australia. I was there last year.
it's 23, 22.6, so it's greater than New York City.
Much greater than New York City.
New York City
but
is
you're
about
right, it's
14
spread out.
million.
But when you go, Vincent, you go to Melbourne, you'll see a beautiful city with tall buildings. If you go to Sydney, you'll see a beautiful city with tall buildings. If you go to Brisbane, you'll see a beautiful city with tall buildings. People choose to live on top of each other because we're gregarious. We like to be near each other. So the amount of land that we take up to occupy for living space is minuscule compared to the amount of land we need to feed us. So 7 billion people need the size of South America. That came back to an earlier point that I was raising. What if we could reduce that by half?
It would help.
It would help a great deal, of course. It would allow the same number of people to eat exactly the same way with half of the land. It would allow us to restore the environment to the point of sucking the carbon out of the air that we put there and allowing the earth to cool down and to become a more reasonable place in which we could carry out our lives. And that is the concept that I am operating under that would never force me to work on anything else in my whole life. I want to see that happen before I die. That's what I want.
What do you want to see happen?
I want the Earth's CO2 amount to reverse. Instead of being 400 parts per million, which it is right now, I want it to go back to 360 or 350 or 320. Set the clock back to the 1980s or to the 1960s or the 1950s. Give us a chance to catch up to the climate change issues.
And this will occur by recovering the farmland and letting forests grow there.
Exactly right. And in the meantime, farm indoors and still have the same food. What's wrong with that model?
Are you passionate about this, Dickson?
Nah. I can't stop thinking about it.
Really?
I can't stop
You think about it all the time?
I think about it day and night. I do. I have kids. I have grandkids. I have great grandkids. It's not a good enough reason. You know, that's a selfish reason. You can't state it like that and get away with that because people without grandkids will say, I don't have any grandkids, but I still feel passionate. Why shouldn't you? I do feel passionate from an objective humanistic point of view. I want the human condition to improve. And there's only a few ways that can happen. And one of them is to allow the natural world to recover its balance and its ability to help us live better lives.
Well, judging from last week's urban agriculture,
Yes.
we're moving towards that direction. There are farms, indoor farms, being built left and right.
Tons of them. And by the way, I
Not
understand we
tons,
have some email from last time.
We do.
Would you like to read a few?
We have a lot of email. Actually, it's really, really, really piling up.
Okay.
I'm happy to say, Dixon.
That's good news.
First one is from Garen. I am writing to hopefully claim the first email to the show prize. No, we read the first email a long time. I have listened to every episode of all 3 podcasts, so this new one also excites me. I have a degree in anthropology, so I know a bit about early culture as well. Currently, I'm a farmer. Well, I say farmer. I'm actually starting an orchard. Does that count? I live outside of my city limits by just a hair, so can I count this as urban?
Sure.
You mentioned apples and pears. Well, this just happens to be what I am planting, but not to eat, but instead to ship off to those with more money than I and large steel containers in which we can let things ferment a bit.
Uh-huh.
Speaking of fermentation, you can make apple and pear
Liqueurs and
yeah,
ciders,
sure.
etc.
How about fermentation as a show topic?
Sure.
I'm not quite sure what other kinds of show topics you would like, but how about a show on mycorrhiza and pink pigmented methyl troughs, among other organisms used to increase crop size and yield? A final suggestion: as an apple farmer, the specific rootstock breeding programs have allowed a per-acre planting density of apples to go from somewhere around 30 to 60 an acre to 2,000 to 4,000 an acre. Wow.
Huge.
Personally, I'm planting 1,000 apples per acre, so the use of clones, grafting, tissue culture, and the like, and their importance to modern crops would also be interesting.
Wow.
Oh, and as a pick, I would like to suggest a book series called Gibraltar Earth by Michael McCollum.
Nice.
I know that the Fermi paradox was mentioned recently in one of your other shows, and this book is based on that principle and actually has correct and well-researched science, as opposed to what we talked about on our show. Like us. So, Dickson, all these topics I would love to cover on urban agriculture.
Well, we'll need to get him on the show then, because he apparently knows more about that than I sure do.
Not just lights and water and pumps, but fermentation.
It's about people.
And yields per acre.
All these other things.
So we're going to have to engage the farming community or the agricultural...
The urban agricultural
the universities that do research. We can get some of them.
Yeah, that's
Dixon,
right.
You got to work on this, Dixon.
Hey,
I can't do it myself.
I understand that.
Tim writes, Hi, Dickson and Vincent. I'm a longtime listener of your other not-so-secret podcasts. I've always enjoyed the conversational nature of your discussions and Dixon's ability to make any textbook-style material sound like a story. I have a background in microbiology and infectious diseases, so I am very familiar with the organisms, techniques, and issues discussed in the Twix podcasts. Listening to your discussions on those topics is a good way for me to stay current and to hear your professional insights into various infection-related issues. Now that I have found your Urban Ag podcast, I am realizing just how valuable your style is as a teaching tool when starting from scratch. I know virtually nothing about the history of agriculture and the current issues surrounding this topic, and I find myself hanging on your every word. I had to pause the first podcast to write you, and thank you so much for doing this. Not only am I learning about a topic that I don't normally spend much time thinking about, but you're inspiring me to consider new techniques to use when teaching my own student. In my opinion, every classroom could benefit from a Vincent sitting next to the lecturer to foster more of a conversational discussion of the topics being covered rather than a one-way lecture of the material. Anyways, thanks again. I totally agree. I think our conversational style is the best way to learn things.
I would agree. And then allow them to join in the conversation.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tim. Christoph writes, Hi, guys. Just a short note to say well done on your latest podcast. I heard about it on Twiv and practically ran to find it on iTunes. I thoroughly enjoyed it and look forward to the episodes to come. I had read Guns, Germs, and Steel by Jared Diamond a long time ago and loved it, and I find the beginnings of modern humans, art, language, and agriculture fascinating. I look forward to seeing where you take this podcast and what guests you bring in to chat with. We could go back. We could get someone whose specialty is early farming.
Agriculture.
Yeah, absolutely.
Paleo-agriculture.
My listener pick of the week would be the Inquiring Minds podcast in general, but in particular their latest episode features an interview with Jared Diamond talking about the publication of an adapted version of his book, The Third Chimpanzee, for kids.
Cool.
Keep up the great work. Oh, it's good. We're getting listener picks, too.
Very nice.
And we don't even have picks of our own, Dickson.
No. Well, we should on an agriculture show. Shouldn't you have a pick?
Yeah, you should. I even
Crop
have
of the
a
week.
pick. I have a pick at home.
Crop of the week.
Peter writes, Dear Dickson and Vincent, first of all, thank you very much indeed for another exciting podcast series. And he gives a link to an interesting, just published analysis by Greenpeace Austria of bee-harming pesticides in ornamental plants sold here in Europe. May be useful to your work in some kind of way. Many greetings from spring-like Wiesbaden, Germany. Peter, fervent Twix listener and teacher for biology at a German secondary school. P.S. I am not an author nor officially engaged in Greenpeace. I heard this recently, that some plants, something covered with pesticides could be harming the bees, right?
Right. Well, atrazine.
Ornamental plants. So they're selling ornamental plants, which then you bring home, and then the bees go on it and get the pesticides.
Yeah.
A toxic Eden poisoned in your garden. So this is a link to the show note.
Right.
To the article by Greenpeace.
Right.
And then Christophe writes, Hi again, esteemed Professors D and R. I read this article today, and it ties in nicely with your first episode in the first Green Revolution you're talking about. And he sends a link to an Ars Technica article, which is entitled Reading Human History Using Ancient Chicken DNA and Chili Peppers.
Nice.
The two papers, the article about, and he links to those. Multiple lines of evidence for the origin of domesticated chili pepper, Capsicum annum in Mexico. It's a PNAS paper. And establishing the validity of domestication genes using DNA from ancient chickens.
Very nice.
That's pretty cool.
Very nice.
You know, we could do a paper now and then on urban agriculture, right?
Listen, I'm totally in favor of that, of course. You bet. A lot of topics out there.
Alan writes, and this is not Alan Dove.
No.
I am a community activist who supports myself as a vascular surgeon. I have been a faithful listener of Twim, Twip, and Twiv and about 150 other podcasts in all fields, but your three are all in my top 10, and this one looks like it will be there also. I do international crisis, medical missions, and nutrition, food, and water now are always the highest priority. I've been in El Salvador and Haiti shortly after the earthquakes, the typhoons in the Philippines, and the refugee crisis in South Sudan, and many others, most recently Guatemala. I have therefore developed a significant interest in feeding those in the third world. When those in the field talk about the Green Revolution, they almost always, it seems, refer to Norman Borlaug and the work he did to start the scientific improvement of crops. He won the Nobel Prize and used the money to set up the World Food Prize.
That's right.
This is the Nobel Prize of improving food production, storage, delivery, and quality. Hopefully you will win one someday for your vertical farming. Dickson, you should. The prize is given away each October in Des Moines, Iowa, for a day conference where they also give multiple other awards, including the CAST Award for communication of the problems of food and nutrition, another one you might win one day. The conference is 4 days with over 1,000 of the world leading food scientists, CEOs of top food-producing companies, and the agricultural ministers of over 20 countries. The access to these people are wide open. They also have tables that you can set up for very reasonable rates. They have free media badges that you would qualify for with your blog and podcast. I have access to a studio a block from the conference that I could get you access to for interviewing people. I feel you would love this conference.
Sounds good.
This is in Des Moines, Iowa.
Right. They just had a big flood there.
We should go to this conference, Dickson.
We should.
Set up some interviews and take
That'd be great.
Alan's offer to...
Yeah, no, that sounds exciting.
Want to do that?
Sure.
Should we go right now?
I think the meeting's over right now, though.
Early October.
Cars were up to their windows in water in Des Moines yesterday. They had huge floods.
Brenda writes, more please.
That's a little short letter.
I'm not done. Thanks for the podcast. I paused for effect.
Oh, okay.
Thanks for the podcast. How about discussing soil?
Well, we did touch on it today.
But we're talking about soil-free farming, right?
Yes.
Always.
Yes.
Is it true that earthworms are not native to North America? How would that affect plants?
I don't know if earthworms are not native to North America. I think some form of earthworms. There are many different kinds, by the way. I think there had to be earthworms in North America. It depends on the species as to whether they were introduced or not by bringing plants over from Europe.
Yeah, I think some of them are invasive.
Oh, sure. I have no doubt about that.
182 taxa of earthworms
Exactly.
found in the U.S.
Oligochaetes.
60 or almost 33% are invasive species. So there you go.
Sure.
How do you think they would get in, Dickson? In dirt?
Absolutely. When colonists came across from Europe, they brought their plants and animals with them. And that's the dirt. And that the worms was in the dirt.
You want some more?
Sure.
Jim writes, good first show. Thanks. This is our friend Jim from Virginia who writes to our other podcast.
Oh, yeah.
I went through my list of podcasts and found over 20 related to food that might be of interest as a source of people to contact or to pass on to listeners.
Uh-huh.
One is with Dickson, of course. Tried pasting them below, but it caused too many errors, so they are attached as a Google Doc.
Nice.
So he sent us a Google Doc which is a list of sources for
Terrific.
various programs.
Well, let's put that in the show notes so that everybody can
Of
take
course
advantage
we will,
of that
Dickson.
knowledge.
But these are people we might want to
Sure.
interview. It all has to do with food.
Remember, it's an open invitation.
And then Jim wrote again, I saw this link and thought it might fit in with your discussions. Perhaps someone in the Maker organization would be worth including in a discussion. And this link is, it's a magazine called Makezine. So Make is the Maker Fair. Space Age Gardening, Aquaponics, Hydroponics, and Aeroponics. And it's a little discussion of exactly what we talked about today, Dickson.
How about that?
See, hydroponics means growing
So
without
why don't you
soil.
give me a pick of the week, Vince? Let's start our pick of the week right now. Then.
Well, I'm not done with my
No,
letters.
okay,
Oh, you want me to finish?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
One more. Okay?
Sure.
Or do you want to stop?
No, one more. I'm just worried about my wife. That's all I think.
Oh,
She's
I'm sorry.
trying to
Why didn't
call
you
me
say
and-
that?
Well,
Ryan writes, hi, I'm
You
really
have to.
enjoying your urban agricultural podcast. I'm hoping to hear a discussion about the influence of R.A. Fisher on agriculture and science in general. I don't know much about him or other than he's credited with founding modern statistical methods, and his early work was done at the Rothamsted Agricultural Research Facility. It could be a great story relating agricultural history to general scientific practice.
well, I'll have to check that out.
All right, Dickson, I'm very sorry that I interrupted your interruption.
No, you didn't.
You have a pick of the week?
I do, actually. It's an online magazine. It's an e-magazine. It's from Australia. And it's called Practical Hydroponics and Greenhouse.
Wow. It's a magazine?
It's a magazine.
That's nice.
And I think it's a quarterly. And I subscribed to it for 3 years. And it's got lots of wonderful articles and information in it. And it covers all the topics that we've just discussed. Nutrient solutions, different configurations of grow systems, lighting systems, building configurations, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's a lot out there. There is a lot out there. And so this magazine would, among others, and see where it's from. It's from Australia. You know, Australia, you said it's got 23 million people. They're spread out all over the place. What's the biggest feature of Australia you can think of?
The Great Barrier Reef.
Oh, that's not quite in Australia, actually.
It's not?
No, it's off the coast of Australia.
Well, don't they own it?
I don't think so.
All right, what's the biggest feature?
The desert.
Yeah, they have a lot of desert.
Huge.
Have you been to the desert?
I have.
Have you walked miles for miles in the desert?
I have been to Alice Springs, and I've been to Ayers Rock. And so I know that it's a desert, basically.
No, I'm not going to do anything. I'm just working.
But the people have to eat.
Yes.
So how do they do that?
Vertical farming.
Well, or indoor farming. A lot of greenhouses.
So there's not a lot of agricultural land there, is there?
Not a lot.
So how do they eat?
Do
they import their food?
They import a lot, and they grow some. I mean, if you look at the coastal region of eastern Australia, it's green. It's enough to supply maybe 60% of the produce that the country needs, but the 40% is not there. And it's an extreme environment. Even the green zones get extreme weather events that interrupt agriculture. So it's not an ideal situation. But indoor farming would solve it. And so you're going to Australia next month. And
I'm going next week.
Next week, I'm sorry. That's right. It's still June. Today is still June.
You're right. It is next month. Darned if Dickson isn't right.
Last year, for once, last year, I believe it was last year or the year before. It probably was the year before that. I and my wife went to Australia to a meeting near the Great Barrier Reef on Hayman Island. And I gave a talk about vertical farming. And I would say it was well received because everybody there realized that Australia looks like a giant continent, but it really is an island. It's not a continent, right? It's not counted as one of the 7 continents. And it's isolated. It's really isolated. If you compare and contrast that to New Zealand, which is 2,500 miles away to the east, the soils of New Zealand are fantastic, and the weather patterns are quite wonderful for growing food. If you go to Australia, you've got just the opposite effect. You've got the desert. Huge amounts of desert. Huge amounts of solar power potential to power the grow lights to the indoor farms. It's perfect setup.
Are any being built in
Australia?
Australia?
No, I think they are being built. Oliver Foster is one of the architects that designed one at Queensland University, and he's become a leader in the concept of vertical farming in Australia. And I think you're going to see that actually happen there.
All right.
Why? Because they have to.
We'll cover it.
We will. You'll have to go back to Australia. It's an
no,
only
it's
18-hour flight.
Too far. That's it. One trip.
That's it?
That's it. No more.
I bet you enjoy it, though.
Probably.
You'll see kangaroos. You'll say, my God.
I'm going to be in the city. I'm not going to see
They'll
any
take you out
kangaroos.
to see a kangaroo. Don't worry.
Nobody's going to
They're easy
me
to see.
anywhere. All right. This episode of Urban Agriculture will be found at iTunes and urbanag.ws. And you should send us your questions and comments. urbanag@urbanag.ws. Dickson Despommier can be found at verticalfarm.com, Racaniello.org, medicalecology.org, and, of course, urbanag.ws. What an empire, Dickson. Thank you.
Oh, you're quite welcome.
I'm Vincent Racaniello. You can find me at virology.ws. The music that you hear on Urban Agriculture is performed by John Harrison and Ronald Jenkins. You can find his work at ronaldjenkins.com. You've been listening to Urban Agriculture. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back soon.
Now we'll see you upstairs at the vertical farm.